listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with The Briefing.
America.
They're eating the dogs.
America.
We are not going back.
I am trying to buy your vote.
I accept your nomination
To be president.
The US election looks batshit crazy from this distance, watching on from Australia. But imagine being at the centre of the craziness right now. In this episode of The Briefing, we take you away from the polls and the campaigns and the candidates into the homes of 3 different Australians living in the US, whose lives are going to be directly affected by the outcome. It's part of our special US election coverage all this week on The Briefing. Now, the polls are frankly pretty useless at this stage, telling us that the race is so very close that a few thousand voters in one swing state or another could decide the outcome, or it could be a decisive win for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Like I said, useless. But tomorrow is the big day. Millions and millions of voters will cast their ballots across the US to choose the next president of the United States. First up, you'll be hearing from Chris Mead. She's from Melbourne, Victoria, and she'll be voting in the key US state of Arizona.
I'm a realtor, actually. So I sell dead people's homes. Isn't that sad, but true?
Okay.
But
Okay, so how are you feeling about the election right now?
frustrated. And it just cannot be over fast enough. It's just been a long, long journey, inundated with commercials and ads and opinions and scandalous-ishness or whatever you want to say. It's just ridiculous. I'm done with it.
How long have you been in the US now?
24 years. So too long. Had a bad day, married a Yank.
Look, it can happen to the best of us.
I know, it did.
Are you planning on voting yourself?
I am. And I really, really think this one is one of the most important ones I am to vote in, for sure. And I'm determined to vote in it.
What kind of outcomes are you hoping for and that you maybe are worried about depending on who wins this election?
I'm just going to say it outright. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I register as one, but I cannot tolerate Trump. I can't tolerate his lies. I can't tolerate his deception. Everything that comes out of that man's mouth is just not true. And quite honestly, I got my citizenship before he got into office previously because I was scared he was just going to have a day where all the A's just have to be deported today. Do you know what I mean? And he's going to start with Australia or the Austrians or the, whatever. And so I'm like, nope, you cannot. And I have a son here and I was not going to leave this country without him even, and you just don't know what's going to next come out. And that's the scary, scary, truly scary part about it. He thinks he's above the law, in which the courts gave him a hall pass for one of the things. It's on and on and on. And I'll be honest, my husband and I absolutely had an exit strategy. If he gets in this time round, we have to have an exit strategy because we can't live in that society.
What is your exit strategy?
It was going to be moved back to Australia for sure, or another Commonwealth, probably Australia because that's where I can, and I'm a citizen there, obviously. My son's a citizen there. My husband would get citizenship. So that would be the easiest path to do that, even though, in some regards we can't afford a tent down there, but we would easily migrate back with the assets we have here. But yeah, we would do it for sure because we were just not going to raise our son in that environment. I really feel like he'll put us into a dictatorship. And the scariest part is I don't think he'll ever resign. It's not a democracy anymore. It'd be a dictatorship. And we wouldn't have much choice.
What is it like speaking with other people in Arizona? Do you avoid political conversations? Do you have them? What are those like?
They're horrible because everyone's in their lane. And it only takes 1 or 2 words just to stipulate, then they'll go, oh, you're on that side. it's pretty much mandatory now that you just don't talk politics unless you already know where that person stands, because it gets quite, not violent, but aggressive. No one's ready to come to a common ground, and we have more common ground than we think. I'm not an extreme Liberal and I'm not an extreme Republican, but I can understand both sides and respect both sides. But when it gets to, the election was stolen kind of thing, that's the thing. You just can't convince anyone. And that's how arguments or how conversations end. They're like, we'll agree to disagree, because at this point, there is nothing we can say or do to convince or convert you either way, because it's that strict in their brain. Empathy, no problem. That's the kind of conversations I'm happy to have. I just don't want to be coming to a brick wall of like, you have no idea and you're an idiot, right? It's more to me on the other side than it is on the Democratic side. We're prepared to listen, so to speak, whereas they're just like this, and you're brainwashed. I'm like, what? You got to read, dude. You just got to read, or you got to do a lot more research than just blatantly say something that is being told to you.
My name's Scott Dishan. Grew up Western Victoria, a place called Casterton. After school there, moved to Melbourne, and I've actually spent the last kind of good part of the 10 years here in Michigan.
So living in a swing state, what does this election look and feel like where you are?
It definitely feels like there are a lot of Harris-Walz signs. That probably would have been more than a Biden sign. So she definitely does have momentum in this state. I know that JD Vance and Trump's going to be here. So there is a lot at stake at this state of Michigan, I do believe.
I know that Kamala Harris has been in town, and as you mentioned, Trump is coming. What's it like when a presidential candidate turns up in your area?
So there's a big motorcade. A lot of the highways and freeways will get shut down, kind of upsets the city, depending on what side. The people can't get to work and school, and the limousines are cruising down the freeway, and all the exits are stopped. With the Conservative supporters, they're usually rural people. So I live downtown Grand Rapids, and you can kind of notice when JD Vance or Trump's in town, you kind of get a lot of the rural people will come downtown, a lot of the big trucks, the jeans and the cowboy boots and all that. So you can kind of tell there's something on for their party, where usually the left or the Democrats, you can't really pick them from a crowd.
Do you find yourself speaking often with other people about politics, given that the election is so close, or is it something that you avoid talking about?
You can't really avoid it sometimes, but if I'm out on the weekends or at a family's house, usually the family won't like talking about politics in front of me. I was from Australia, and they don't want to bore me with what they've been talking about, so they do keep it away from me. But sometimes in the workplace, you can't really avoid it. I think my workforce here in our office is about 20 full-time staff. And I think maybe 60 to 70% of them will vote. They don't have a day off like we do in Australia. So people live paycheck to paycheck. They can't afford a day off on Monday or Tuesday to go vote. So some people are like that. So I can't afford a day off to go vote. I need to work.
And what is it like being an Australian in the US while this is happening?
It can be tiring. I'm going home at Christmas time, and I can't wait. I'm kind of looking forward to this being over. Some of the families I was talking to today, their kids at school, the 9 and 10, 11-year-old kids, they're talking about politics, which I kind of think we're very lucky maybe in Australia that we're not that involved in politics where the children are talking about it at schools. And I kind of just think that's a bit unfortunate.
Let's say Donald Trump wins, or let's say Kamala Harris wins. What changes for you personally?
I'm a non-immigrant on a visa that kind of lasts 2 to 4 years. It's a professional visa for Australians. When Trump was in power then, he actually nearly got rid of my visa class and gave it to another country in a kind of trade deal. So, he can affect me if you kind of got in the power and did that again for the future, or for the future of any professional Australians trying to get to the US.
Hello, everybody. My name is Di Bowman. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia, but moved to the United States in 14 years ago, so 2011, and I currently live in Phoenix, Arizona.
What is it like there right now?
Generally, I think people are very stressed. This is my fourth election, and it feels very different to every single one before. The tension is really high, and people are just exhausted. This election has been going on for 2 years, and you're just hit with ads every single day wherever you go. So my friends and I, there's definitely an excitement to be getting over Tuesday and getting into Wednesday.
In terms of your own life and the life of people that you know, what kind of outcomes do you foresee depending on who wins this election?
That's a really good question, especially for somebody who's living in a state like Arizona. I'm a border state, and so immigration continues to be a really big issue here. We are more of a libertarian conservative state as well. And so with my friends, we're kind of inner city Phoenix, which is more of a liberal city. But as soon as you kind of get outside the greater Phoenix area, you start to move into that conservative battleground. So people know the stakes are pretty high in terms of this election. You see it every corner in terms of the signage, and we're talking signage for not just obviously at the presidential level, but for every level of government in this state. And you definitely feel this year that the turnout to vote, people have been very active, and there's a lot of people who are doing early voting because they want to make sure that their vote is counted.
How does this election compare to, say, an Australian election that you've experienced?
I am now so much more appreciative of Australian elections. The fact they're 40 days and 40 days only, the fact you have the blackout period. I think too, for me, what's been really interesting in the 4 elections I've gone through is just how much money is involved here. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars in terms of fundraising and the advertising. So you really feel it every moment when you're on commercial TV or at your sporting event because people have got the ads out. I also think what's really interesting is there's a real apathy here as well because there is not mandatory voting. You talk to people who are not for either candidate, and for them, it's quite okay it seemed to be okay in terms of just staying home and not voting. And I think that's really different too in terms of what we see in Australia.
You mentioned that you've been in the US for 14 years and you're not allowed to vote. How does it feel being an Australian with all this kind of swirling around you right now?
I think it's really challenging for people who live in this country but cannot vote, because it doesn't matter how informed you are or how much you pay attention to the discussions and the debates, you have absolutely no control over the outcome. And so you're very much sitting there hoping and waiting for people to actually engage in the political process, knowing that there's very little that you can do in terms of influencing outcomes.
One of the things that people have expressed worry about is the potential for violence. What does it feel like there? Are people worried about that where you are?
I think it's fair to say, yes, there is concern. And I think after, obviously, what happened on the 6th of January and the insurrection, it is fair that people feel that way. I also know that we have the Maricopa border supervisors, and that a number of the supervisors have in the last election, I should say, received death threats and have to actually be taken into hiding with the sheriff. We have already seen this cycle here in Phoenix that we've had at least one person arrested on domestic terrorism charges. So that's kind of a fact-based situation I can point to. I'm sure everybody has a different level of concern in terms of what's going to happen, but we have definitely seen incidents whereby the police have been called and the courts have been invoked in terms of people going through criminal proceedings. So that is very real. And to go to the question about how does this differ from Australia, I think that's a huge differentiator between the Australian elections and what's happening on the ground here.
Di Bowman, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing this to the Australian audience. It's a wild time to be living in the US, I can tell you that at the moment.
Di Bowman there. And before that, you heard Chris Mead and Scott Dishon, all Australians living in US swing states that could be key to the election result. That's it for this episode of The Briefing as part of our special US election coverage this week. We'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can always check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.